Okay, this is the first time I am doing a recording on my camera. So if you are interested in watching me talk and sit here for some reason, if that's more entertaining, make sure to check out this on YouTube. So I don't want to say happy 1 year COVID anniversary because it's definitely not something that is attached to a lot of happiness, I think. But I definitely think there's a ton that has been learned in 1 year of a pandemic, 1 year being in lockdown, 1 year of experiencing quarantine, and a whole year that has completely changed all of our lives. And it is insane to kind of try and wrap my head around the fact that this has been going on for an entire year. I just turned 20, and the first time when I turned 19, that was the last time we ever went out. For me and a lot of the people really close to me, is celebrating my 19th birthday was the last time we ever did anything, remotely normal, quote unquote, for the time it was. We went out and we danced and got drunk and did things that who knows, we'll get to do, when we'll get to do them again. But first, before we kind of get into this whole episode, I want to apologize for when I talk super, super fast and how it can probably be a lot. I get very excited. And also just to note that not all my episodes come out in chronological order, so I have some coming up in the next couple weeks that I actually recorded quite a while ago, so not everything is in complete order. But anyway, I want to talk about a lot of the lessons that I've learned in this year of forced slowing down, this year of reflection, and this year of, disconnection in some ways, but showed me a lot about how to form new connections that is important to me and meaningful, and is really what's gotten me through this year. But to kind of, one thing I really want to touch on too is that, this still sucks, and it's okay to say it sucks, and we don't need to sit here and talk about all the silver linings, because I have had a lot of conversations with people around me about, I'm in second year university. There are so many people that I didn't get to meet that I otherwise would have met. Getting to be on campus, getting to go to school in person, and it is really, really sad to think that a big part of my university experience is not kind of what it was supposed to, and that's super hard. And I also just want to acknowledge the healthcare workers and the frontline workers and the people who have lost loved ones, and the people who, have people have loved ones in long-term care facilities, and how there really only has been one visitor or no visitors at all for so much of this year, and how awful that is, and how hard it is, and just the amount of heartache that I think we've all experienced. And at the end of this episode, I'm going to more dive into where I was in my life right before the pandemic hit, because that's sort of a longer story, but I really just want to dive into all the things I've learned and the reasons that I actually am grateful this happened, because if this didn't happen, I wouldn't be who I am today. I have learned so much about myself and my life, and I wouldn't be sitting here talking to a camera right now, probably, and a microphone, if this pandemic didn't happen. This podcast is a product of the pandemic, and who I am today sitting here is a product of the pandemic. So happy pandemic anniversary of 1 year, and hopefully I can't even wrap my head around if this goes on for another year. Let's not go there. I try not to think too much about, this going on for a crazy long amount of time, and it's easy to spiral, and I'm just kind of going about my life as I wouldn't say normally, but just going about my life as it is right now, and knowing that there's not a lot we can control, and that's okay. So the first thing that I really, really, really learned in being put into lockdown is how to stop running in a lot of ways, running from myself, running from my emotions, using other people to cope, using other people to kind of ignore my own feelings and my own problems, and using them as kind of a distraction. That was the first thing that was really, really, really hard for me. And I want to give a big shout out to the people who went through a breakup during the time that COVID hit, because for me, I'll touch on this at the end, I was going through a breakup. I moved out of my apartment that felt like my home. I wasn't seeing my best friend anymore because of the pandemic. And so there was so much grief slewed into like one period of time that it was really hard to even like process all the things I was feeling. And even before the pandemic hit, there was a lot going on in my life that was really challenging that I didn't realize I was not acknowledging, and I wasn't allowing myself to think, sit, process, and eventually heal from, because I was ignoring it. I was running so fast from all the hard feelings that I had that I hit the biggest brick wall you could imagine when the pandemic hit. And I think a lot of people can relate to this, is that we live in a society of productivity. So when we got put into lockdown, we had to sit with our thoughts and only our thoughts, and just hang out with the people we lived with, and that was it. And that was hard because a lot of us aren't used to that. I know I wasn't. I had never been in such a low point. I'd never been so sad. I'd never cried as much as I did in that period of time. I'd never, I don't know if I accepted it or if I resisted it, but I really, really did struggle with being by myself and not being able to distract myself from anything. Right before the pandemic hit, I was partying every weekend and going back between my downtown apartment in Toronto and my home in Etobicoke with my family, and I was all over the place. And so the pandemic taught me that I really need to be able to sit with myself and be alone with myself. And there is no greater lesson than learning to be comfortable with who you are and just who you are. I mean, like, I have been single for almost 2 years, and even then, I didn't think I was ever choosing to be single. Being single chose me, and that was like the default, when in reality, I love being in relationships. And, it's been a year of the pandemic, and I think just now I'm finally sitting and being like, no, I want to be alone. I want to choose to be alone. I want to focus on me. And if someone comes along, great, but I'm done seeking. And before the pandemic, I was just seeking all these external factors to distract me from my mind and to validate me and to not find it from within, because it's the hardest to sit with our own emotions, because I think of the fear of what might come up. And the pandemic forced us all to sit with our own emotions, I think, in a lot of ways. So that's the first big thing. The second thing I really learned was who my people are. And I really also learned a big difference between having good friends, but having good and reliable friends. And reliable friends is in people you can turn to whenever, people you can turn to in good times and in bad times. And there is just such a distinct phase of lockdown, of quarantine, of last year, I think from like March to May, when the weather still wasn't great, where I would just FaceTime friends like all the time. I wasn't even doing walks really yet. And there were just certain people that showed up for me who I also showed up for, and we could like sit in the hard and know that it was gonna be okay eventually, and we didn't need to solve each other's problems, because how are we solving each other? Like this is a global issue. So just being able to know that it's not about fixing, and it's just about supporting. And I really got to experience who my really, really close people were, and especially when I went to Vancouver for 3 months during this pandemic, I found my family in the people who would call often, who I would catch up with, who I would stay in touch with, who I could go to when I was at my lowest. Because, I didn't even realize this. I think everybody can say this, but definitely in 2020 and in the past year, I experienced my lowest lows, somewhere in Vancouver, somewhere at the very beginning of the pandemic. But it has put me in a place where I have learned so much and gotten so much more comfortable being completely with myself in the lows, that I know how to work through them. I know when I just need to sit in them. I know that they won't last forever. Today I was in a horrible mood, and I just went and sat outside for like 10 minutes and read some of a book, and immediately felt better and was like, okay, now I'm feeling inspired to do this episode. And I never do an episode like the day before it goes out, but I'm doing that right now, which is, well, we'll see if I feel like editing it later. Hopefully I do. But I just learned who I could turn to in times of need. And And that's so important. When people are going through hard stuff, that's when you know who your real friends are and who your friends are who are truly your family. And I'm really, really grateful for that in so many ways. Okay, so another thing I learned, which I actually got tattooed on my body, I didn't get the words tattooed, I got a symbol of it for myself, is that home is within me. And this is something I took a very, very long time to grasp, because I felt like the apartment I lived in downtown Toronto finally felt like my true home to me. And then I moved out, and I moved in with my parents when the pandemic hit. I thought I was going to be with my parents for like 3 weeks, but nope, here we are. A year later, still here. But my apartment felt like home to me. And then when I came back home with my parents, it was just super, super hard to adjust. I didn't feel as comfortable. My room also didn't look like this. Having a bedroom transformation where you love so many parts of it now, like I love so many parts of my room now, and it's just changed the entire feeling it gives me when I'm inside of it, and just like hanging out here, that's like huge. But knowing that the location actually isn't what makes you feel at home is such a big lesson. When I was in Vancouver, I would say all the time, like, I don't feel at home. Like, I just feel so uncomfortable. I can't relax. Like, I just want to go back. I just miss the feeling of being safe and being comfortable. And luckily through my therapist, I finally started to learn home is where I am. Home is a part, like, yes, home is often a location. Home is attached to the people around us. But at the end of the day, it's in here, because that's all we have. At the end of the day, all we have is ourselves. And so if you can't find that feeling of home within yourself, where are you going to find it? No, you can't look for it externally all the time. It's not there. And so my therapist really gave me the advice to start focusing on when I felt at home, rather than, our brain always likes to look for problems. So rather than always focusing on when I felt uncomfortable, she, really pushed me to focus on when I felt at home and when I felt safe. And that changed a lot for me. And the tattoo I have is a sliver of a moon. And for a couple days in a row, I started to feel a lot better when I was in Vancouver and I was by myself, and I was in sweatpants and a sweatshirt, and I was super comfy, and it was late at night, and I was walking to the grocery store, and I noticed the moon, and it was a sliver, and I was like, oh my God, like, I feel good. I feel happy. I feel safe, and this is coming from within. And that happened to me a few different times. And a recent conversation I had with my therapist was about finding peace within the moment. And she's like, you know how to find peace within the moment. Like, it's tattooed on your body, Jess. You wouldn't have noticed that moon if you weren't at peace in the moment. And I was like, shit. My therapist always calls me like, she's just so smart. I love her. So that was really special, and I think it's just a constant reminder for me to look within. And that's another thing. I would not have started therapy if I didn't go through this pandemic. We're going to touch on that in a second. Because that's a bit of a longer conversation. But the other thing I wanted to touch on before I get into that is I really learned, this goes hand in hand with finding home within myself, with learning to be alone, is that, like, getting comfortable with boredom. Like, I think so much of this pandemic, we had to slow down. There was a lot of times when I was like, I'm so bored. Like, what? And it was like resisting it and fighting it and hating it. And like, we're humans that love to be busy because of the way our society has like made us feel like we have to be busy and productive all the time. I hold a lot of value with productivity, which is not good. And I am working through that, because I am so much more than just what I get done. I'm so much more than my to-do list. And so a big thing that I learned very much at the beginning stages of quarantine too, probably within the first like 4 or 5 months, I was talking to my therapist and I was like, I'm so bored. I don't know what to do with myself. And she was like, Jess, creativity stems from boredom. Boredom creates creativity, or like, like those two things are linked, and boredom doesn't need to be a negative thing. And without boredom, without getting, without having quiet moments, without letting my mind wander without having more time to connect with my friends and have meaningful conversations, you know what wouldn't be here? This. Me talking to a microphone right now. Me sitting here right now. If I didn't get bored during quarantine, I would have never made a podcast, which is insane because of how happy this makes me, because of how fulfilled this makes me. And that comes back to, if we don't give ourselves time to slow down, we won't know what we can truly create. If we don't give ourselves time to slow down, we can't really get to know ourselves. We can't really get to know what feels good for us, what we love, what we care about, what we really enjoy doing, what fulfills us. And if we don't give ourselves that time to slow down, we're going to keep moving at such a fast pace in a direction that we probably don't want to go in, and it'll take us a lot longer to figure out that that's not the direction we want to be in. And so getting comfortable with boredom is hard, especially in the society we're in, but it is a very impactful experience, and I still struggle with accepting it. But I'm really grateful for that lesson that this lockdown taught me. This wouldn't have happened unless we were all forced to stay inside, you know? I feel like I'm painting this beautiful picture of like the pandemic, which I don't want to be doing because the pandemic also like sucks assholes, like major. But I do think we've all changed like magnitude amount because of it. And it doesn't mean we need to create some crazy thing. If you didn't write a book or create a podcast or do anything crazy with your pandemic, doesn't mean that you didn't learn from it, doesn't mean that it wasn't valuable for you. Like, the past year of this lockdown is not about, like, I don't want this podcast to seem like it was about doing all these crazy self-growth things, because it's more about like just connecting with who we are more in a way that we wouldn't have otherwise had because we were forced to slow down. And like, you don't need to create something or have anything tangible to show the change that I'm sure you've experienced and you've made in your own life. But so yeah, like, saying that, I do want to acknowledge that this wouldn't exist without the pandemic, and I'm so grateful for that. I try and think about like what I did before the podcast existed, because I can't picture a life without it now. And I was definitely not as happy. I was not as fulfilled. I was taking 5 courses each semester, which didn't fill my cup as much. A balance between podcasting and doing some sort of part-time work and doing school is exactly what I need. If you don't know, I took only 3 courses in my first semester of my second year, and I'm only taking 3 courses right now. I don't know if I'll ever take 5 courses again, because that balance is just so just like good for me. And being able to sit and express all these thoughts that I have, and the fact that it's reached people is just like, I can't even process that. Any message I get from people saying they've listened to 1 episode or half an episode, or if you've listened to a few episodes, like, it means everything to me. And it's just crazy that, you know, I'm sitting here and I have this because we were in a global pandemic, but we're still in it. But it's just been an amazing way for me to connect with new people also. And it's really shown me how important community is and how important connection is and how much I thrive on it and function. Like, I need it to function, honestly. And this has been a tool and a vessel for me to create more community and to have meaningful conversations and to communicate with people that I would never otherwise have. It's like, I like to say it's like my perfect excuse to talk to my like idols or to talk to like people I look up to. It's like, it just gives me an excuse to be like, I want to meet you. Let's like talk about something and record it and like post it. But really, it's like Ivy Tide, like the band that came on just a few days ago. They're so cool and their music is so great and they're like such good looking guys, and I wouldn't have had a reason to talk to them if I didn't have a podcast. Like, yes, you can always reach out and be like, hey, I just want to pick your brain, like, let's do a call. Speaking of Pick My Brain, sponsored by Pick My Brain. Pick My Brain is a really cool platform where you can book people and reach out to them, and you don't need to have like a reason. You don't need to have a podcast to talk to them on. You can like, and a lot of my guests are brains. And you can scroll through all these different profiles and book people to have these like really amazing conversations. And if you look up to someone, or if you want to like learn more about environmentalists or CEOs or entrepreneurs or writers, check out Pick My Brain. There's lots of people on there like that. And it's a great way to book someone and talk to them, and it's like it's not like you don't have to weirdly be like, hey, can I talk to you? And so I'm grateful for the podcast too, because it's a really cool way to be like, hey, can I talk to you on my podcast about this? So it like gives me a reason to like reach out to people I love and I just like look up to. So love that. Therapy. So I'm going to go into a whole like therapy aspect, but before I do that, this year has allowed me so much self-growth that wouldn't have happened otherwise. I think I would have been moving at fast rates still. I would not be slowing down. I would just be looking for fulfillment elsewhere rather than inside of me. And that's one of the biggest things I've really, that is the biggest thing, is learning how to validate myself, growing, knowing what I want, and being confident in that. And guess what this is thanks to? Therapy. So now I'm going to kind of talk about my story, where I was at before the pandemic hit, and how this led me to therapy and led me to where I am today. So right before the pandemic hit, I was, like I said, going out every weekend. I was seeing this guy. It was sort of the first serious, in air quotes, thing I've had since my high school relationship, because it was my first, I can't even call it a relationship. Everybody knows, my generation knows, it was a situationship, if you want to call it that. It was we're basically dating, but we're not calling it dating. We're exclusive, but you're not boyfriend, girlfriend. It was one of those, like, slept over at his place like multiple times a week, like hung out with him all the time. His best friend was dating my best friend. Like, he lived down the street, so we saw each other like basically every day. We had class together, and it was the first like adult thing I had, like not living with my parents. Didn't have to tell my parents really anything about it. It was the first more intimate thing I've ever had since my high school relationship, since I've grown tremendously as a human being. So it was the first kind of real intimacy I've experienced as this like new woman. And I was going through a lot because my dad had some health issues in January of 2020, and so I hadn't really processed that at all. And so I was really, like I said, putting my emotions elsewhere. I was ignoring them. I was hanging out with this guy all the time, going out with my best friend, his best friend, going out in this group of 4 every single weekend, drinking and staying up super late and doing school and going to class and going back and forth between my house with my family and then my apartment in downtown. And so I was never ever alone. So then when the pandemic hit, it was weird timing. It was like 3 days before, it was the day before the pandemic hit. And him and I had a conversation about what we were doing and what we kind of wanted to do in the summer, because he wasn't from Toronto. And he said he didn't want to be with me in the summer. He just wanted to be friends, but he didn't want that to affect what we were doing right now. And we talked about that right before we were both falling asleep at his place, and I was like, this is gonna hurt in the morning, and boy did it hurt. And then we talked about it, and I told him that's not what I want, and it was really hard for me. Like, something I've learned so much too in this pandemic is like how much I have struggled to stand up for myself in romantic situations. And this was a perfect example. Like, I couldn't even say I want to date you because I knew he didn't want to date me, but we were like basically already dating. It was a whole thing. But so sorry, I talk so fast. But so things ended with us, and that same day, school was canceled. And then 2 days later, he flew back to where he was from. So I've never seen him since then. And then about 2 days after that, I moved back in with my parents, and here we were. And here I was in this pool of grief, not really sure how to differentiate any of it. You can't, I still can't differentiate any of it, and that's okay. For the longest time, I was like, why am I so sad over this 2-month thing ending more than my 2-year relationship? But it's also because it didn't play out. There's a lot of possibilities of where it could have gone that my brain would think about, but I don't know. Like, I don't know the problems that would have risen. I don't know the good or the bad that would have happened. But also none of it would have happened because we were ending right then and there. So in a lot of ways, the pandemic was good for me because I can't imagine continuing and finishing that semester of school with him still in my circle of friends, but not how he used to be. So, as I said, I was running from my problems, and luckily, I think it was a month into COVID, I was still paying to live in this residence building that I, like with Ryerson, that I wasn't living in, and we used to have like workout classes we could go to and cooking classes, and so because that's not happening due to the pandemic, we got an email saying we had 160 free minutes of counseling with this platform called Inkblot, and I was like, awesome. In January, when things were crazy with my family, I thought about going to therapy and never did. And here I was at like the lowest point in my life. And I was like, let's try it. Therapy sounds like a good idea right now. And I was very, very fortunate that the first person I matched up with is still my therapist today. And she changed my life. She changed my life. She taught me so much. She taught me how to validate myself, how to look internally, how to stop putting so much pressure on myself. It's still a work in progress. My whole life is a work in progress. Everybody's whole life is a work in progress. But she taught me, what I really want. I learned that I hate hookup culture through her. I had been on this negative cycle of like looking for fulfillment in hookups with people I wasn't dating, and I finally like opened up to her about a bad experience I had like 2 days after it happened, and she was just so real with me and just always led me to figuring out how I really felt. And I'm just so, so grateful. Without that opportunity to have that resource of this platform called Inkblot and being able to find her through that, I wouldn't have started therapy, because it was hard. Finding resources is super, super difficult. And she actually lives in Alberta, and we've obviously done virtual therapy. I've never done in-person therapy, and I don't know if I wouldn't say I never will, but like I would say that like I love her and I'm like going to stay with her for probably a while, and like it's going to be virtual for however long I'm speaking to her, because she doesn't live in Toronto, unless I like one day I have this image of like going to Alberta and meeting her in person because I love her. But therapy has been the most transformational thing, and I think I can credit so much of my growth from the pandemic to therapy, because I spent so much time working on myself, because like everything I'm sitting here talking about, what I learned about, was because of therapy. I was able to talk it through with her, and like also like talking with my friends and like sitting with myself, and like writing's been so therapeutic. Talking on the podcast has been so therapeutic. But truly that is the key for me to figuring out what I really want out of life and what really fulfills me and what feels good for me. And like I'll never forget one time she was like, I was feeling like my feelings were invalid. I felt like how sad I was over this thing ending with this guy was so like invalid. And she was like, Jess, who validates you? Like, who validates your feelings? And my brain was like, you. But I was like, me. I validate myself. And so that's what it is. And the two things I'm most grateful for in this entire pandemic is the podcast and therapy. And that wouldn't have happened without it. And I want to sit here and acknowledge that this still sucks so much, and we can't hug some people that we love so much. But at the end of the day, at one point this is going to end, and we're going to come out of it, and we're going to be able to hug each other and love each other. But until then, like, be careful, social distance, go on like social distance walks with the people you love, wear masks, wash your hands, and know that whatever you're going through, you can get through it, and you always have yourself. And that's a really liberating thing to come to terms with when you look at it in a positive way. So thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for tuning in. Follow me on Instagram at Jessica J. McDonald. Follow my podcast at Human to Human Pod. Watch this on YouTube at Human to Human. All the links are in the description. Thanks to our sponsor, Pick My Brain. And I will chat with you guys soon. Feel free to message me with anything you want to hear. And I'm really excited to keep doing solo episodes because I'm going to do a lot more. And I will see you on Tuesday for a very exciting episode.